Okay. Okay. It's the 24th of May. At least it is in Australia. Here we go with the top stories of the day. I picked this story from Reuters about problems the central bank has been having with the elimination of the highest denomination notes that occurred roughly 8 years ago. My recollection is perhaps 2014, 2015. So Indians are having to deal with the withdrawal of the largest remaining note, the 2000 rupee note, $25 US approximately. Now these notes are being withdrawn from circulation in order to stop people from avoiding tax, hoarding cash at home, blah, blah, blah. Obviously there's a real cash economy going in India, as there are in most developing countries, and the authorities want to move that out into the banking system. Fine. See how this goes. Yes, so the demonetisation of 86% of the country's currency occurred back in 2016. The sky was said to be just about to fall in on everybody back then. It didn't. They survived. It's quite possible, though, that people swapped their older, larger denomination notes for jewellery, IOUs, gold, whatever it might be, luxury items, art. Very much doubt that happened on a mass scale. But they're doing it again. A lot of people are using 2000 rupee notes to pay for mangoes since Saturday, says a mango seller named Muhammad Azhar. Interesting. So he has to provide change on that. That must be a bit of a problem if Muhammad doesn't want to present his completely legally obtained 2000 rupee notes to the bank. Don't see what's wrong with that, actually. Michael Martis, a store manager at Rado store in a mall in central Mumbai, says his store has seen a 60 to 70% increase in 2000 rupee notes since the withdrawal was announced. That has increased our watch sales to 3 to 4 pieces per day, up from 1 to 2 previously. That's got to be good news for the Swiss watchmaking industry. I feel sorry for those guys from time to time. So, I think this is probably a story to watch. You know, if it happened to me, I wouldn't be worried. I haven't seen a $100 note for ages. I think I've forgotten what they look like. Here's an interesting story I pulled out of the Canberra Times. Selected from the Canberra Times. Stupid ad there. Australia's COVID-19 cases are soaring amid fears that the country is facing a fifth wave of Omicron infections. Now, I was at a GP's on Monday. They told me that the new strain of COVID can't be detected with a rat test. Here we go. I mean, we're not really in the summer spike that we had. So this is a rather strange screen arrangement. So that summer spike just before Christmas, we had 40,000 cases in New South Wales alone, it would seem. 40,000 cases for the week. Reported COVID cases, changing weekly reporting. Yeah, okay. And now we're trending back up again. Now, I heard that last week in Sydney there were 53 deaths. I don't know if that's true. I don't know what the source of that information was. Just someone in the health industry said that to me. COVID Live. No, I don't want to open that up. So, I think I just keep bumping into people who've had COVID recently. Just in the last week, I can think of 3 people I know who I've spoken to directly who said they've just gotten out of bed because they had COVID. Now, I don't think we should worry about that in particular. It looks like nothing like what we had going on back in Christmas time. Anyway, moving on. With some good news. Rolf Harris is dead. Australian entertainer and singer Rolf Harris. Wouldn't you describe him as Australian pedophile and former entertainer? Anyway, so he's died overnight. I don't like making light of someone's death, but no one's going to miss Rolf Harris. Remember, he was quite a figure when I was growing up. There were plenty of TV shows that would feature Rolf doing his art, his wobble board, his singing. I didn't think he was that good, actually. Anyway, Channel News Asia selected a story here about the White House touting movement on debt ceiling after latest talks. Well, this is probably the biggest story that we should be watching in the next few weeks. The deadline is June 1. The Republicans don't want to give him a higher debt ceiling without an agreement on lowering spending. So it's going to be difficult to see a way forward on this. I imagine that quite stressful at the moment if you were operating in the money markets. I think there could be some sharp increases, decreases in values. And I think more likely it would be on the downside. So negotiations between Biden and the Republicans in Congress look set to go to the wire. From the Republicans' point of view, you can't really see there being much point of having, the threat of a nuclear response like this without actually using it. I mean, why would they agree to avoid a default when their whole purpose is to reduce government spending? And that's one way of reducing government spending, of course. The Republicans in Congress have refused to do so without to engage in these negotiations without a commitment from the Democrats to cut spending next year and bring down the country's $31 trillion debt burden. Unbelievable. 9 days to go. That's a story to watch. Karine Jean-Pierre appeared to rule out a constitutional solution to the debt crisis. I wasn't aware that she was a constitutional lawyer. It's saying that such a move is not going to fix the current problem we have right now. Interesting. I pulled this one out of the Pacific section of Radio New Zealand, New Caledonia. Obviously, there's a move for self-determination. New Caledonia is a French possession. Pro-independence parties have had a couple of opportunities to push forward with referenda on decolonisation. I think there have been 2 in the last decade and a bit. 2 in the last, okay. It's the Caledonian Union said the statement contradicted the 1998 Noumea Accord, which was to conclude after 20 years with New Caledonia's full emancipation. Now, I think the votes that have been held, the 3 referenda held between independence, on independence from France between 2018 and 2021, resulted in the rejection of full sovereignty. I remember Macron was out there trying to talk them into staying, a little bit like what happened with Scotland and the UK when they tried to go off on their own. And in New Caledonia, you've got to say, surely New Caledonia is better off being part of France. It's what makes it special, right? What makes it significantly wealthier than the neighbouring countries that tend to have much lower development outcomes. So, Rock Wamitan, probably got that wrong, in Paris in April. So they're back and forth. They've got representation in Parliament there. It's one to watch, The French government refused to accede to the plea, and as a consequence, the pro-independence party stayed away from the polls in protests. Interesting. See what happens. Although 96% of the population of those who voted cast a ballot against full sovereignty, turnout was only 43%. And that might mean that if they could get a full turnout, they would carry the day. Seems rather a stupid thing to have done, actually, in hindsight. French Interior Minister due back in Noumea. God, that's a long way to go. Obviously, there's a great deal of interest in France in keeping them in the fold. Something to watch. I guess also, too, at some point, a decision will have to be made about the future of Bougainville. Not too far from New Caledonia. PNG government yet to properly outline a plan for independence. So the French are suggesting a much longer period towards full independence. Boy, it's a tough one. As long as it doesn't get violent, that'll be great. Sudan, there's been a US-Saudi brokered ceasefire, yet another one, and they're still fighting. Go figure. The deal to stop violence comes as journalists' syndicate accuses paramilitary group of targeting reporters. Terrible. So a week-long ceasefire in Sudan intended to allow the delivery of humanitarian aid got off to a shaky start on Monday evening as witnesses in Khartoum reported fighter jets over the city and continued fighting in some areas. So this war's been going on for 6 weeks. I'm sure there's been at least 1,000 people killed at the moment. I think it began on the... Hang on. That doesn't seem right to me. I don't think it's been going quite for 6 weeks. I thought it started on the 14th or the 15th of April. Anyway, it started on a Saturday night. Saturday morning their time. My time was Saturday night. The heavy bombardments could be heard east of Khartoum, witnesses said. So no joy for those folks in Sudan. I think there's 24 odd million of them. It's one of the poorest countries in the world. They have a multitude of problems. The last thing they need is these two factions fighting it out in the capital like this. So, debt ceiling negotiations, a little more on that. No deal yet. This is from CNN. Possibly a bit more current than the information from Channel News Asia. Channel News Asia is my favourite Southeast Asian media source. I favour South China Morning Post for other articles, and I'll be reading some of them out a bit later on and in other days when there's something more to talk about. The looming deadline. Janet Yellen warned Monday that Congress had only a little time left to pass legislation to avoid a first ever US default. Several other analyses back up Yellen's forecast that the so-called X date, when the nation would default, could arrive in early June, though they don't necessarily think it is as early as June 1. Now, I've questioned this myself. You theoretically run out of money on the 1st of June. Well, they've got quite a bit of money. It's only a small fraction of the additional spend they can't manage going forward. Surely they can put off some spending, some acquisitions. I think that there'd be opportunities with defence contracts, for example, to suspend payments and suspend work on, I don't know, the latest aircraft carrier or whatever it might be. That might end up costing you more money in the longer term, but there are options rather than not paying your debts off. That surely is the last thing anyone would ever do. I think a bit of bluster from both sides, to be perfectly honest here. Biden insisting that there's no way that he can talk about what the Republicans want. The Republicans holding the line that they will force a default, but even if there's no agreement by the 1st of June, surely the Treasury can rearrange its spending in order to prioritise payments to creditors. There'd be other people who'd miss out. The states could hold on for payments. I think it's all a bit of a big deal over nothing, to be honest. But it is going to be one of the biggest stories in the world for the next, what have we got? 9 days left. Not quite 9 days. So, what's going on here? Top Democrat criticises Republicans for spending cuts in debt limit deal. Okay. But if you want a deal, that's what you've got to do. You'd think that they would have realised this when they lost control of the House, the lower house, the Congress. A wise person once told me then that any good negotiation ends up with one or the other party not being happy. The best negotiations end up with both parties not being happy. So there you go. I'm just checking to see whether this is streaming okay. I think I need to do something to crop in my image. It's just too much there. So, Hakeem Jeffries, the replacement for Nancy Pelosi, as I believe, a little bit clueless and naive. Swing district Republicans reject Democratic effort to force vote on debt ceiling hike. Fine. Don't worry about the swing district Republicans. What about the hardcore, side of the party? Surely they have even less interest in this happening. Let's move on to the next one, because I'm not really all that. I think that might be my last one. I'm not really all that convinced this is much of a story. Well, here's an interesting story. What happens if the US runs out of money? Now, time is running out to avert. Oops, we better get rid of that. Time is running out to avert a US debt default, says CNN chief business correspondent Christine Romans, reporting on what could happen in the US and abroad if a deal is not reached. Okay. That seems to be a video. I can't play that. But, what does happen? I would argue that it's a risk worth taking because there are ways of managing it. So, I think I've learned something here. I'm going to crop my images in a bit closer. I shall do that in the next broadcast set for tomorrow.